I'm Liz Ritchie, Chair of the Board for Civic Influencers, and I could not be prouder to welcome you today. This is a happy and an optimistic day for our nonpartisan organization, for young voters, and for our country. And I want to thank all of you for being here and our team. Maxim and the staff you just saw, our almost 900 trained and funded boots on the campuses that we had this year, our campus partners, especially community colleges, trade schools, historically Black colleges and universities, tribal colleges, and APPI and Hispanic serving institutions. And a special thanks to all of our community partners and allies. And to all of our donors, we thank you for supporting our data-driven work with campuses and young people and making today's achievements possible. At this town hall, you'll learn the results of our strategy to empower a movement of young voters over the last year in swing districts and states. For those of you who have been engaged with civic influencers, you know that Maxim, our CEO, has been unwavering and very public in his optimism that young people will save our democracy by voting in these midterm elections. He was unabashed and oftentimes counter to what all of the pundits and naysayers said, that these elections were already baked and that young people would not vote. Civic influencers successfully stuck to our laser-focused strategy of carefully selecting and helping tipping point campuses and young people in swing states and districts. You'll hear how our pivot to this approach last year has yielded exceptional results in 2022. And we will continue through the Georgia runoffs and on into the 2024 presidential elections. So thank you all for helping co-create our young voter movement. But we need your continued support so that we can continue our momentum into the Georgia runoffs and to get us through the end of the year. So I hope you'll commit to renewing your donations for 2023 and 2024, because that will allow us to plan ahead. Next year will not be an off year. We must secure our gains and deepen and expand our work on campuses in the swing districts and states that have emerged from this year's elections. With that, it is now my pleasure to introduce you to Civic Influencers CEO, Maxim Thorne.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thanks again to the staff who have been tireless in working across the entire country. Hard to tear up so quickly. But these are tears of joy about the hard work that all of you have done for the staff and for our funded civic influencers, almost 900 this year. The growth of this organization and the depth of our work has paid off. It came at a lot of sacrifice to stick to this strategy that we are celebrating today. And I think the country is celebrating because it came from a place of such a threat to our democracy. Personally, some of you have heard me talk about being an immigrant to this country and the joy and pleasure of becoming an American citizen and to be able to be free and to vote in this great land of ours. It was also terrifying for me personally to think about all the advantages that I had that new immigrants and other young Americans would no longer be able to enjoy if we became some kind of fascist or totalitarian country. And part of our commitment to democracy and to this youth power and youth voting power movement is to ensure that the image of this great city on the hill would be preserved and expanded, and that we'd have an inclusive democracy that folks in the future could enjoy and inherit and make even better. And what I could say with real joy is that we did it. We did it. What Liz said, and thank you so much for those words, Liz, when people were saying that the results were baked, that there was going to be a tsunami that threatened our very democracy and all of our democratic institutions, we knew here from the pivot that we did last year that that was not the case. That is not what we were hearing from young people. That is not what we saw folks, young folks, 18 to 29-year-olds, saying about what their concerns were. We determined that we were going to lower barriers to voting in swing districts, mobilizing tipping point campuses. Those are those institutions, community colleges, trade schools, historically Black colleges and universities, and other people of color serving institutions. Mobilize them, and they could, in fact, determine the outcome of elections. And their decision-making was not what the pundits were saying. We have on our website, civicinfluencers.org, amazing data on how we mobilized the margins and how we worked with tipping point campuses. And what we knew is that they were not making decisions based on quote unquote kitchen table issues. Gen Z voters are holistic voters. They care as much about the climate as they care about getting rid of gun violence, as much as they care about LGBT equality and a woman's right to choose and determine what to do with her body. They care as much about all of these things in a holistic way. And that was proven by this election. And so what we were saying is why we were optimistic is that they cared about the future of our democracy. So I'm going to share with you some really insightful data that we gathered. I hope will leave you optimistic about the Georgia runoffs, which we will talk about, and about the future elections, particularly the presidential elections in 2024. So here is what we know. Young people were particularly motivated by 3 Ds: Dobbs, deniers, and democracy. We saw that. And when I say young people, I mean young women and young men 18 to 29. We saw such a 28 points preference for pro-democracy candidates by young voters. For boomers, the majority of boomers, if it was only boomers voting, would have voted for only Republican candidates. For those who were 30 to 44, it's almost 50-50. For young people 18 to 29, there's a 28-point lead for preferences for Democrats and pro-democracy candidates. And I want to show you one of the most insightful things that we found. And this counters what you've heard pundits say. So here's what we looked at and what we found from the 2022 elections. If in a swing district, competitive district, the candidate, which tends, in this case, a Democratic candidate, appealed to young people to such an extent that that candidate got 70% or more of the youth vote, that candidate absolutely won. I repeat that. If your appeal to young people made you reach 70% or more, you won. What we also know about what I just said is that young people tend to be the most progressive voter. They cared about your position on climate change. They cared about your position on gun violence. They cared about your position on LGBTQ equality and about abortion rights, all of those things. So the more you appeal to them, if you got to 70% or more of their vote, you won. And this is dramatic. This is dramatic. That tells me that we need to start listening to the largest block of voters, which, by the way, is now 18 to 29-year-olds. It is not boomers. In this election, the young people of our country have become the largest voting bloc. It is true they still vote at a lower rate than boomers, but we have seen marked improvement. Here's what we saw. We saw that this election had the second largest turnout for young voters in American history. The only one that beats it is 2018. And the factor that we posit, and by the way, it was like less than 1%, is Mr. Trump was the president in 2018. And he is a mobilizing factor for young people voting. But he was not on the ballot this year, and he's not the president. In 2024, which we'll also talk about, Mr. Trump has already announced his candidacy. And I will dare say that will be a record-setting turnout for young people, because he has that potential to foment greater turnout. It's an incredible achievement, by the way. And I'm going to show you something else. It's an incredible achievement that we predicted, and we have shared with you our prediction based on our analysis of margins that were tight, that we could mobilize young people at these margins on these campuses in those districts that we call tipping point campuses. And that those young people could hold the line or determine the outcome in the direction if they wanted to flip it in a direction that reflected their beliefs and their desires. The pundits said to a lot of you that that could not happen. This was going to be a tsunami against what young people's interests are. And I'll show you how it actually turned out and why we are so happy. So these are the districts. Let's move this out so you could actually see it, that we focused on in this country. There are 65 on this list. We had the top 25. But what I want to show you is remarkable about how young people held on or even flipped districts, right? All the no's you see here in this column means that there was no change. There was no tsunami that wiped out these incumbents. What you also saw is that there were even Democrat flips in Michigan 3 and in North Carolina 13, which we'll hear about later. What you'll also see that there were only 6 Republican races that flipped, just 6. No tsunami here. This was unprecedented in how people expected this to come out. It's an incredible testament to the laser focus in identifying where young people could exercise their power and determine the future of our country. The last bit of data I want to share with you, because we did promise that this would be a deep dive into our work, is this, to show you how much we have to thank young people for the outcome that we are now enjoying. You will see, now the blue that you see in this graph were the margin of victories in these races. What we have seen is that in a lot of these races, the entire margin was made by young people's votes, or the great proportion was made by young people's votes. And if young people had not voted, these folks would not have won. This is against everything that pundits have been saying. Young people determined the outcomes of so many of these races. And in particular, for the Senate, where young people flipped a seat, totally against what was predicted in Pennsylvania. And if in fact they are able to do what they did in Georgia in 2021, where young people who voted in the runoffs in Georgia in 2021 increased their share of that relative to the presidential election. Let me put it another way. Young Black people who voted in the Georgia runoffs in 2021 were more than young Black people who voted in the presidential election for Joe Biden. This that you're seeing here on this chart bodes very well for young people's excitement for the Georgia runoffs, our ability to mobilize them, help them connect the issues they care about to voting, and to get them to turn out in numbers to secure the pro-democracy candidate that they want. This also sets us up for what we think will be an incredible movement and a momentum leading to the 2024 presidential elections. The maps have changed because of redistricting. So we're living with these maps for the next 10 years. What I will say to you is, had the laws not changed in Ohio and Florida and New York, the Democrats would have held on and won Ohio and more in Florida and in New York. We are suffering from gerrymandering. We have suffered from whether the Democrats attempted horrible gerrymandering in New York or whether DeSantis had carefully and successfully gerrymandered Florida, and the same thing in Ohio. That has affected our democracy. There would have been a better outcome, but for those changes that we experienced. Nevertheless, the choices we made have paid off. I want to admit, we had a certain amount of worry when we were making these strategic choices. For example, our data showed that Ohio and Florida were no longer competitive. We determined that last year, August, and we received a lot of pushback that those were always purple states. And we made a tough call that we would withdraw a lot of our work statewide in Florida and in Ohio. And the truth that we realize today is that those were the correct decisions. They have moved so far from competitive. And what we also decided to do was invest resources. In fact, the majority of our staff live in Texas to focus on Texas. That Texas showed such potential for young people's increase in power. And those were the right decisions. We also focused on districts that people had never heard of. They weren't the monsters or the heroes. They weren't Lindsey Graham or Susan Collins or Nancy Pelosi or AOC. They were winnable. They were winnable by young people connecting the issues they care about to voting. And that is why we are celebrating what they did and their power. And so I wanted to thank you who invested in this strategy and this pivot that we made. Thank you, Liz, and thank you, Leno, and thank you, Vivian, and all the members of our board and our Blue Ribbon Committee, like Reggie Van Lee and Sharon Broyd-Peshkin, and so many different people who invested in this and helped us hone this, like Professor Peter Levine at Tufts University and Kelly Beadle, who is working with us on our data. That is why we can actually move forward. We have to break down some of these walls. We have to break down these binaries. Young people don't think in binaries. They're holistic thinkers. And that is the way forward. And that's the way that this organization intends to move forward. And now it is my pleasure to introduce you to the incredible person who is Patrick Oakley, who is Chief of our Organizing, Advocacy, and Learning.
Hey, thank you so much, Maxim, and good afternoon, everyone. It is such a pleasure to be with you today, and just want to just begin by thanking you for all of your support. My name is Patrick Coakley. I am the Chief of Organizing, Advocacy, and Learning, and I have the pleasure of working with a lot of the awesome staff that you've seen already today, who are doing the actual, tangible, on-the-ground work with our civic influencers and just really making sure that the engagement in the civic power is happening. Now, most of the time, we're here actually today to talk about data. And I think many will often think about our work in civic engagement as clipboards and ground game. But I want to remind everyone that data is a regular and key part of the work that's baked in, even at the civic influencer level. We're also excitedly right in the midst of Data Week, which is actually a regular bit of engagement that we do every term. To not only teach the civic influencers about the importance of data, but also help them learn how they can use it to change their community. We want them to understand data as a key part of their engagement and a way that they can just not only just track what they're doing, but really leverage their communities and friend groups to the change that they're looking to bring about. Now, the data that we tend to talk about is identified in the Mobilizing the Margins report. And if you haven't seen it, you definitely want to look at it because it really gives us as civic influencers direction and thinking about how the CIs are going to engage in their communities, how they're going to look at key states and districts, how we're going to decide where we're going, what schools we're engaging, our deep dives, our stakeholders, pretty much everything. It's our guide for creating good, inclusive engagement and making sure that we're not just doing things all willy-nilly. Now, we've been expressly using the 13 data points from our tipping point index to help guide the engagement of our civic influencers. And these are the points that we've learned from the data specifically can increase youth civic power. And as we've looked at them, you'll also see these in the Mobilizing the Margins report, we've realized the power specifically of 2 of the points that are in that 13. And those are election day as a holiday, or having election day as time off from class or work, and getting a polling place on campus. We've even specifically seen that young people that have had access to these things have been able to create more success in the civic engagement. And in some cases, since we know that, a lot of the candidates that won in this last cycle won because of large amounts of youth voting presence, this is the sort of thing that actually can help determine whether a candidate will stay in their seat or lose their seat, because the young people have their election day off or they have a polling place nearby. Incidentally, in New York, Kathy Hochul has actually passed legislation mandating a polling place in areas where there's more than, I want to say, 30 students as a matter of law. So we're seeing that these ideas that we've been putting forward about young people being able to access their civic power are starting to be recognized as key across the country. Now, young people also in North Carolina have made some significant efforts in the push for Election Day as a holiday. It's super exciting what was actually going on last week around Election Day. And I'm actually pleased to welcome Anna Kubich, our state organizer at large in North Carolina, to talk a little bit about what the CIs did. Hey, Anna, how you doing?
Patrick, I'm doing well, thank you. And hello, everyone. Civic influencers have specifically been working on Election Day as a holiday initiative in order to make sure that young people also have the time and capacity to vote, especially in areas where polling places have long lines or polling locations are short across geographic distances. This term, we're continuing to use the elements identified in the tipping point index to drive change across the college campuses in North Carolina, but also the country.
Excellent. Now, I know that it was super exciting last week, and that there was also a few successes across the districts. Tell me a little bit about sort of what went down in North Carolina, sort of after all the votes were in.
Yes, so for the 2022 midterms, we identified 2 U.S. House districts in North Carolina with open seats as priority districts. In District 1, a rural area, we worked with Elizabeth City State University, a historically Black university, and Wilson Community College. Ted Budd, now North Carolina U.S. Senator, left District 13 seat open. Both district seats were won by pro-democracy candidates due to young people and people of color civic power.
I mean, excellent. It's good to hear that. And, stepping back briefly to the voting, holiday, this really has the capacity to feed into state and national campaigns if we're seeing like other leaders start to think about it. In North Carolina, where there was such a huge push for it, was this a team effort, or was it sort of like individuals sort of leading a group? How did it play out?
It's definitely a group effort. In North Carolina, civic influencers at multiple schools have become advocates for Election Day holidays. At the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and Duke University, Sam Heiner and Mick Tobin, co-founders of North Carolina Young People's Alliance, have combined efforts as part of a statewide movement to organize students in advocating for university Election Day holidays. At the University of North Carolina at Asheville, civic influencers are also working collaboratively to bring the systemic change to their campus and have tentative plans to meet with campus administration next semester. The All In Campus Democracy Challenge yesterday recognized many of our campus partners in North Carolina as most engaged campus for college student voting, including the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, Duke University, and the University of North Carolina at Asheville. This speaks to the impactful work of our civic influencers and young people across North Carolina, and that would not be possible without y'all's support. So thank you so much.
Oh man, thank you so much, Anna. And with me as a historically Black university alum too, I love the work that we're seeing on the ground in North Carolina, as well as the engagement in the warm bosom of the South, since I'm also from South Carolina, which is also in your territory, in addition to your great work with the Tar Heel State. I think what's interesting about that too is, as we think about the stuff that's happening with the HBCUs, but also in the rural spaces, is a lesson that we've learned, which is that not all youth vote the same. And because of that, that's one reason why it's so important to build these coalitions that support youth voting, even across districts. One of the things we've learned, students of color in rural areas did not vote the same as just general rural youth. So it's really, again, sort of like, hammers home why the participation of youth networks is going to be key, and why it's something that we, again, continue to see coming forth as we examine the data that's coming back from the districts. Now, through the work of our data team, we've identified many districts, even in California, that are primed for similar actions that we saw in North Carolina. But one of the challenges is that after redistricting, there was a whole new set of campuses that needed to be organized. And even though a lot of these districts haven't been called yet, young people can still bring about significant change in these districts. And with greater investment, there's always capacity for this sort of change. Now, in California District 47, which is Katie Porter's district, which actually was just called, I want to say, as recently as last night, our civic influencers at Vanguard University initially spent the beginning of the term working to get a polling location on their campus. But they quickly ran into a roadblock when campus administration shot down the idea and said that there was a neighboring off-campus polling close that was close enough for students. And once these initial aims were shot down, the civic influencers quickly reassessed and pivoted. And just like the data tells us, they pivoted towards building a coalition with BIPOC organizations on campus to run educational seminars, talking about the power of voting, how to create impacts in your community, and how to make sure that their peers are prepared for the upcoming midterms. And just as we've seen, this also leads again to success in the district. Now, we also know, even again, as another example, that youth networks will continue to be successful because in Michigan, in District 7 and 8, we were able to identify 14 new campuses that were previously not in the district before. And as a result, Alyssa Slotkin was able to retain her seat, which was actually the seat that's most in jeopardy in Michigan. So all of this is to say that the data points to the importance of us not only building coalitions on the ground, but also maintaining coalition with each other. And so this is why we really need you to also continue to support our work from now through 2024 and to continue helping us to help these young people really build this strength together. With that, Maxim, I'm happy to pass it back to you.
Thank you. Thank you for that amazing conversation, Patrick and Anna. Anna mentioned something that I think people should think about. Both of those districts that we targeted had large rural communities. And if you look at what I mentioned in the chat room, the data shows that the majority of rural youth actually vote for Republicans. But Anna also mentioned that we targeted historically Black colleges and universities and other institutions, trade schools and community colleges, who are mostly youth of color. Micro-targeting is incredibly important in this work. And when we think about Georgia and the runoffs coming up in 3 weeks, December 6th, it is really important for us to figure out, and we have, how and where we're mobilizing young people. As I mentioned, in 2021, young people determined the outcome of those 2 senatorial runoffs. They will do so again in these, but the laws have changed in Georgia. So a couple of things that we did that you might know about that we can't do anymore. So for example, in 2021, if you had turned 18 after the presidential election, you were allowed to register and to vote in the runoff. You can't do that this year. If you had not registered, period, but you were eligible, you were also able to register now and vote in the Georgia runoffs. You cannot do that this year either. So you have to have already registered before the midterms, so that's before November 8th in Georgia, and only those registered people can vote in the runoffs. So we have, in some ways, a limited set, can't grow that base, but we can mobilize folks, young people who have registered and get them to vote. And we're throwing everything we can for that, but we need your help because that was never budgeted. But we know this works and we know it wins. And what Patrick is saying is we have these strategies and these honed skills for targeting community colleges, trade schools, and people of color serving institutions, which are incredibly important in the Georgia runoffs. And then when we're thinking about the presidential election, we need to build on all of those successes. It is incredible that we're not starting where the pundits had predicted. We're starting so above that, where in fact, the Senate may be bigger than it was, and the House may be tighter than anyone thought possible. But the strategies of young people holding the line based on their values and flipping also based on their values is likely to continue if the investment from you continues. Next year is not an off year. What we knew in 2021 is that we had an avalanche of voter suppression bills that we had to fight, where people thought 2021 was an off year. This is the time to go big for Georgia, go big to build up our troops by the end of this year to go into 2023 and deepen those relationships that we finally brokered with community colleges and trade schools. And we know what the swing districts are going to be in 2024 and what the statewide races are going to be in 2024, and begin to really build that movement of young voters and to thank them. I have to say, I was most happy, like incredibly happy, because I've been saying for the last year that the president and others have not been thanking young people for where they have pushed our country and the entire globe on climate change, on addressing gun violence, on addressing student debt, and now saving us, hopefully, from the loss of controls over our bodies and our privacy. The president finally did that. Thank young people. And this is a chance to really honor what they have done with their holistic view and non-binary view and fluid view of our democracy and how they vote. And we can do that. We can only do that if you really invest in us long-term, if all of you renew your donations to us. Like Susan, thank you for believing in this data-driven strategy. And since you're a professor at NYU, I'm particularly grateful because you know about impact investing, and I hope you realize that we made the impact beyond what we thought was possible. But we want this commitment to continue next year and through 2024, because the presidential election, if we were to continue this momentum, could really position us for a future that we could only have dreamed of ourselves, but certainly promise to young people today. Rachel, I know I've been avoiding the questions, but what do we have?
Yes, I'm actually glad that Patrick is still on the screen because we have gotten a flood of questions about what they can anticipate we're doing for the Georgia runoffs. So I leave that up to you and Patrick to answer for folks today.
Ooh, that's a good question, Rach. And it's definitely, I think, the question of the day that all of us have been thinking about. I'll walk everyone through just some of the basic things that we're going to get started doing because this is really where the rubber meets the road. The name of the game is information. Okay, if we're talking about a cadre of young people that where there's 4 million of them turning 18 pretty much every year, then that means last year they didn't know anything about voting. This was probably their first experience. So that also means that runoffs and who can participate or what goes on is also a new experience. So our first step is getting information into the hands of the young people in Georgia so that they know exactly how the runoff works and what's going on. So we're actually developing a toolkit, which we hope to have finished this week, where all of the information on the runoff, how to find their polling places, who's allowed to participate. I think Maxim specifically mentioned that because of the way the runoff is working this year, that basically because it's 30 days, it's less than 30 days after the initial election, that unfortunately, if you were not already registered to vote, then you can't participate in the runoff. But that information is important because people need to know, okay, if I was registered, even if I didn't vote, I could participate in the runoff, or I need to share this information with our network. So our first step is getting that into the hands of as many people in Georgia as we possibly can.
I want to add, but we do have some strategies up our sleeve. What we know is banking votes. What I mean by that is pushing early voting. Georgians can vote early, in person and by mail. November 28th, and in some counties, November 27th, through to December 2nd. The election deniers used a strategy that backfired on them, which is to say they distrusted mail-in voting and drop boxes. So people held back. And so your only option, if you're holding back from using mail-in voting and drop boxes, is to vote on election day. For us, that's your last strategy. We're trying to get young people. So we want to host a concert to drive young people to vote early, which is what we did in Georgia, by the way, in Atlanta with Votelanta for these midterms. We want to replicate that to get young people banking their votes as early as they can, which is November 28th, having them apply to vote early immediately, either to go in person, march down, souls to the polls or strolls to the polls. And then for those who remain, get them out to vote on election day, which is December 6th. We're using everything that we have in our toolkit: dorm storming, peer-to-peer, call 3 friends and take them with you, party at the polls, puppies at the polls. We're also using texting and meeting young people where they are, TikTok and texting. And thank you all, Rabbi Jan and everyone else who helped us with phone banking. One thing that Liam said, who's our national organizer, Liam said that the surprise for our phone banking team was that young people picked up the phone and answered, because the experience for most people and most parents and folks who know young people is that they're terrified of talking on the phone. They will text and do everything else. But we found that young people actually engage us by talking and were willing and asked. Now, some people made some very interesting comments that were not pleasant, but most people really sought information, and we could help them navigate the Byzantine system of their county and where to find their polling location and how to cure a ballot and so forth. We plan to do that again. We have 3 weeks. It can be done. It has been done before, and we could do it again with your help. Patrick.
Indeed, indeed. So in fact, we will be back in touch with our volunteers to talk about the opportunities for the phone and text banking. As Maxim mentioned, we're also going to be, continuing the processes that have worked for us traditionally. Those stroll to the polls, the youth engagement. We're very excited to continue to work with our civic influencers on the ground and really just continue to promote this network. Yes, we have 3 weeks, but it's still a very significant push. And I think with the Thanksgiving holiday there in the middle, it really means that we're looking for everyone to band together and give us as much support as we can in order to make sure that the Georgia runoff election has all of the young people in the area able to participate.
Rachel, can you please bring Mr. Van Lee into this panel to ask us questions? The reason I'm asking you to do that is that we're really grateful, Reggie, for hosting our Texas Power Awards. One of the strategic choices that we made was to focus on Texas as the new Georgia, and also, as you heard, move away from Ohio and Florida. So Reggie, thank you for what you did and what everyone else has done in different parts. But you have a question.
Yeah, it's a 3-part question. First, why are you optimistic about 2024? Second, what did we learn in Texas from the 2022 midterms? And third, are you still interested in investing in Texas going forward?
Yeah, thank you. So I'll take each of those. It was the right decision to go to Texas. Texas has legal and other challenges, but not demographic challenges. What we know is that if we are successful, and we were, if you go back and look, and I can share it again, and we'll send, but we will send everything I shared with you in an email following this town hall. We held the line, young people held the line in every Texas district for the most part. It was incredible. It was an incredible achievement. And if you actually look at Beto O'Rourke's performance with young people, he didn't get to the 70%, which is the significant sort of trigger that I mentioned earlier. But the potential is incredibly great there. So we see a trajectory of improvement. And we also, by the way, even in the open seat in Texas, that was a tight race, went for a Democratic candidate, which was unexpected. We also believe that our strategy, which is about tipping point campus work, organizing community colleges and trade schools in these tight margin places, make the difference. Young people feel mobilized. Texas has a really engaged young people's community. And then there are two other data points that make me excited about Texas. One is, and this, by the way, also found in Nevada, young people who voted and held the line or swung elections, including for the governor of Nevada, Latinos in particular. In fact, in Nevada, the governor of Nevada increased the share of Latino votes beyond what Joe Biden did in the presidential election. That is remarkable. More young people supported that governor's race than supported Joe Biden, who won Nevada. Also, more young people. And here's one of the things about Latino young people. They said the reason they voted for the Democrat was because of Dobbs. That is counterintuitive from what people say, that most Latinos are Catholic and therefore will be single issue of voters against Democrats. In fact, young people are the opposite. I was on the board of Planned Parenthood, and I'll tell you one of the things that was not a closely held secret, that a vast majority, a significant majority of the Planned Parenthood abortion services are Catholics, because they don't use contraception as a way of preventing pregnancy. What we saw with young people and young Latinos, and including in Texas, is that Dobbs, deniers, and democracy were motivating factors, and I think that's likely to continue. I am very hopeful that the demographics for young people and youth of color will move Texas in a certain direction, different than what happened in Florida. My last thing about trade schools, folks. We have to realize we have to listen to what young people say their needs are. In the last, say, 2 decades, our trade schools in this country have almost become computer science repair shops. That's why we all experience shortages for finding an electrician, finding a plumber, finding a carpenter. When we talk to young people, they want to get these trades up and running and want to have their needs met, which are in trades like plumbing and carpentry and electrical work and so forth. I think we can offer, by listening to young people, not projecting on them the futures that boomers wanted or other groups wanted, to get them to really buy into our democracy, that it can deliver for them what they need. And I hear that a lot in Texas, Reggie.
Good. Well, I am excited. I was hoping you wouldn't give up on Texas, and we saw the progress, and you can't get it all done one swoop, so we're up for it again.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much, Reggie. I want to say also to Rabbi Jan, one of the things that we did notice in our approach, and Patrick mentioned this in coalition and alliances, the issues that we identified around race and so forth were also experienced, and the fears for a lot of Jewish Americans and Jewish people around the world. The rise of anti-Semitism is frightening and scary. And part of what we saw in terms of the coalitions of young people were coalitions of young Jewish people, were women and men who were fighting for every cause, whether they were Jewish or whether they were victims of gun violence or whether they were LGBTQ or whether they cared about climate change. They were a holistic approach that if you were against anti-Semitism, you were also going to be for protecting the environment, and you were also going to be for racial justice. And I think we should all be extraordinarily optimistic about this generation that takes the view that we do not discount the issues of anti-Semitism or racism for kitchen table issues. This generation does not do that, and thank God for this generation. We should be so pleased that we helped co-create this generation to lead us in a direction where we are holistic thinkers, that democracy came first as opposed to gas prices. Because who the hell cares about your gas prices if we do not have the opportunity to marry who we love, to control our own bodies, and to be a beacon for the world that this is a country that offers you the chance to pursue the happiness that you deserve, and to create the kind of community and democracy that should be a model for the entire world. And the reason I love our staff, and I love all of the civic influencers and all of our board and all of our Blue Ribbon Committee and all of you, our donors, is because they hold on to that vision and are willing to fight for that despite wannabe fascists and strongmen who would take that away. And no amount of cheap gas will ever replace what it's like to live in a free country. I was born in not a free country. And I did have some benefits. We had free education and free healthcare. But that was not worth the price of not being free and not being able to love who I loved and not being able to study what I wanted to study. And have access to everything else that I think I deserve as a free human being. And our mission is so important. I said when I became CEO last year that what makes us different is our superpower. And that, as Maya Angelou used to say, and I had the joy of spending New Year's Eve with her many times, that God puts a rainbow in every cloud. And each of you here today, and each of our staff, whether they're in Texas or Florida or Wisconsin or Arizona or Pennsylvania like JC, or Vermont like Emily, or Washington State like Elise, or Pennsylvania like Rachel, they are rainbows in the clouds of our democracy. And so are you. And when you donate to us and support our mission, and support our boots on campuses and our data-driven approach, not just an emotional approach, but a data-driven approach to how we can win and preserve and create a more inclusive democracy. You're believing that that is most important. So I want to thank you again. I thank you and ask you to support this work urgently for Georgia, for the end of the year, and to really renew in 2023 and through 2024 so that we can plan aggressively to get to scale to do even better in the presidential election.
Well, thank you so much, Maxim. Thank you so much, Patrick. We have come to the top of the hour, and I am really grateful for everyone's time today. If you have any additional questions for us, you can reach us via email. Elise has listed her phone number. We will follow up. If you have any questions and you want to chat by phone, we'll follow up with email as well. And we'll list some phone numbers where you can contact our Civic Influencers staff members to get you the answers to any outstanding questions that you have. But I just want to reiterate again, thank you for your time today. We are so grateful for you and for your continued support. And we will send you all of the opportunities to work with us through the Georgia runoffs on December 6th. So keep an eye out. There is more to come. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.